what's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back here today with another client interview for you guys. I'm excited to be on with Krish today. Krish is, one of our clients that recently just uh, broke into investment banking. Actually, from a pretty unique background. He was previously in sales and trading, and so that's not something that we see very often. And so I definitely want to get him on here and just have him share his experience a little bit. And I'm sure there are other people out there who are, kind of trying to make the same type of switch and maybe wondering if it's possible. And so, I just want this conversation to hopefully benefit you guys. So, Chris, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I think I was really working hard towards this, and Sam has truly helped me a lot with the process. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So to start, I mean, obviously, I just gave like a high level 2 second overview, but if you can maybe introduce yourself a little bit, like let people know kind of like what your background is, and just so we can kind of level set on, what the context is here.
Of course. Yeah. So I graduated from Carnegie Mellon University in May 2019. It's not your typical target school, if you want to call it that, especially for banking. I would say that it's more targeted towards a quantitative background within maybe like, be it like ETF trading or index trading, or maybe even like quant trading, like a Citadel comes into mind when you think about it. But I was fortunate enough to still land a sales and trading role right out of college. And I was part of within the sales and trading side. I was a junior trader and a desk analyst, if you want to call it that, on the leveraged loans desk. So my desk specifically focused on looking at companies in the middle market space that were either on the verge of filing for bankruptcy or have already filed and are in the process of emerging from bankruptcy. And I got a chance to really look at companies from a credit fundamental perspective, which truly helped me, I think in the long run, grand scheme of things, make a transition into banking. I think some of the skill sets that you develop in a sales and trading role, if you're not in, and what I want to clarify here is not a vanilla equity sales trading type of role. I'm talking more of a role where you're actually quantifying a skill set, where you're actually learning about, how a business operates and really understanding a company's cash flow model. So, my seat, I think the skill sets that were truly required were, being able to understand and perform due diligence on a company for one, and then being able to understand it such that you can portray it and relay it to your accounts that you're talking with, who can potentially trade with you one day in the future. So I think that skill set alone really truly helped me. And I think a lot of people who might be in my seat in a sales and trading background, or might be starting a sales and trading background but want to do banking, should really think about that when they choose their seat that they want to be in. And I think that through that experience that I got while building relationships, obviously, like, you have to network with people in banking if you want to get into that. It's not just going to be something where you apply, click and apply and you get it. I think you have to definitely do that while you're learning your day-to-day job, and you have to be good at both at the end of the day. So, I think that there's a few moving parts of that, which we can get into later. But I think that that's really where my experience lied for the last 1.5 years.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And so, I mean, you joined sales and trading in 2019, right?
Mhm.
Or is it? Yeah, it was 2019. And so this was, I guess, what, like halfway through your first year when you kind of decided you actually want to be in on the investment banking side of things instead, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. I think that I realized, and I recommend everyone do this, really figure out where you want to be 5, 7 years down the line before you say you want to do banking, or before you say you want to do trading or asset management or research. Really understand where you want to be 5 years down the line so you can place yourself in the seat that helps you get there the best, right? The highest probability of you achieving that seat where you want to be. And, I thought that a banking role would really help me with that. And I think that the generalist toolkit that you would develop would truly help me get there. So that's really when I decided that I wanted to move.
got it. Slightly kind of like taking a slightly different angle to, I mean, related, but because we speak to a lot of students who are maybe still in college and they hear about investment banking, and to them, like investment banking and sales and trading are both kind of a part of investment banking, and they don't really they don't really realize just how different it can be, right? And then so a lot of students that we talk to, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I want to get into either investment banking or sales and trading. Either one's fine with me," right? Obviously, for you and I, we've both gone through. Well, you've gone through sales and trading, and now you're about to go through banking. I've gone through investment banking, but people that have actually worked in the industry know that the two jobs are actually quite different, right? Even though they're both kind of under
Mhm.
this banking umbrella. So for people that are kind of on the fence about the two, like what would you say? I mean, I don't think there's like a right answer or wrong answer, but what would you say are kind of like the pros and cons of each, or like what went into your decision in deciding, hey, I'd rather, move from sales and trading to investment banking? Because like I'm sure that wasn't like a convenient thing to do, right? The convenient thing to do would have been for you to just continue in sales and trading you had already gotten in,
Mhm.
but you had to put in all this extra work to make that switch. So,
Sure.
how do you kind of think about that?
I think you have to really think about it from the perspective of what you bring to the table, right? I think that as someone who's making a transition, or even someone who's thinking about figuring out whether they want to be in a sales and trading route or they want to be in like a banking seat, you really want to know, whether you want to be more market focused or you want to be more deal focused, right? Like, are you a more of a transactional person? Do you care more about, really looking at a deal unfold, throughout time and kind of achieving that type of I guess success from that, right? Or do you want to be more in a seat where you're looking at the market, you're really closely following the micro and macroeconomic outlook of the world and really making trades based on that on a daily basis, right? So I think that really, I think when I was in college, that's something I really wanted to be part of. I wanted to be part of the market facing side of things so I can understand how, the secondary market works. But then kind of, later on as time progressed, I realized that still understanding that primary side of the business and that transactional side of the business is going to help me. And I guess just for background, the leveraged loan seat that I was that I was part of in the sales and trading side is a good transition into what I'll be doing in the banking side, because I decided that instead of focusing on a restructuring role or an M&A role or something very bespoke, I decided to only shoot for like a leveraged loan seat. So like a leverage financing group, for example, would be a perfect complement to like what I was doing, right? So instead of applying to all of the M&A rules that were coming up, I really pinned down what would really where I could again add value and what I would bring to the table. And what I brought to the table in this situation was the market aspect of it, right? Understanding market knowledge, but then also being able to understand loans, the leveraged loan space from a secondary perspective, to be able to talk about it from a primary perspective. And I think that's really where, you want to think about, you don't have to do banking right out of college. You don't have to do sales and trading right out of college, but you have to think about where you want to place yourself so you can kind of use that as a leverage to getting to where you want to be 5, 7 years down the line.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, again, for our more, you know, beginner or entry level, whatever you want to call it, for a lot of college students out there that are maybe listening to this, um, if we try to explain to them in layman's terms, like your sixth grade brother, what does an investment banker do versus what does a sales and trader do? Like, I would say for investment bankers, you're primarily advising your clients on one of two things, right? These are corporations. You're advising them either on buying or selling other businesses or their own business, or you're advising them on raising money either through selling equity or raising debt, right? Or leverage finance would be a part of that. How would you describe sales and trading? Like, what does a sale? What does someone in sales and trading do?
Yeah, I think that sales and trading is kind of divided into two sides, right? One is the sales side of the business, which is soliciting interest into trading with the firm, right? That's where the salesperson is going to go client to client, hedge fund to hedge fund, whoever your, underlying client might be. In my case, it was a hedge fund or a CLO manager, soliciting interest from them and telling them, hey, I think that these deals that are coming into the secondary market, which the bankers had done, initially they had underwritten the deal, the loan I'm talking about, these are some interesting things that you should look at in the market, and maybe you're interested in investing in it. and adding it to your portfolio, typical to your typical, portfolio that you maintain now of fundamental stocks. And then the trader would therefore, take that order and kind of execute it either from a principal aspect or an agency aspect, which means, simply put, either you take risk on your own balance sheet to do these trades, or you broker it in a way where you find, if you have a buyer, you find a seller. If you have a seller, you find a buyer, right? So it's very different than a transaction heavy banking seat. But I think that some of the skill sets you develop, again, are quantitative skill sets where you really understand how to value a business before you pitch it to someone and how to sell it to someone. You also learn how to build your qualitative skills, where you learn how to like talk to someone about an investment idea and give them different criterias of, here are the pros and cons of each situation. Now, where do you stand? And I think that banking kind of goes into that as well. And you have to figure out, there's never a clear answer, shortcut, cookie cutter answer where this is how you're going to solve a problem that someone might have, right? It's, you have to really understand what the situation is and what are some possible answers or solutions to those situations, and here are the pros and cons to that.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Thanks for that overview. I mean, so I wanted to just make sure that we talked about that because I just feel like I talk to so many students that have no idea what the difference is. And it's a critical distinction, right? Especially for a lot of these people, it's going to be their first job out of college. And a lot of
Mhm.
times that determines what you're able to do later on down the road, which you were kind of alluding to earlier, is like, sound like you made the switch because you were thinking 5 or 7 years down the road what you actually wanted to be doing. And so just unfortunately though, not everyone is able to make that switch once they take that first step, right? So I want to make sure that people really know what they're getting themselves into. Um, so I guess let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about that transition that you just made. And so what, for someone that, let's say if they start out in sales and trading and maybe they want to go into banking, which I'm sure you're not the only person who's ever wanted to do that. What do you think are like the biggest challenges that they have to anticipate or they have to overcome?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges is that you can't just blindly apply to a job, right? I think that when you are already planning for a banking role, right, when you're in college, you can sometimes just apply to a role and get lucky and get that first round interview, or go through the college recruiting process where the HR team knows you really well through their coffee chats with you at the university level, right? You don't really have a connection that you can make within the banking side of the business, just because of that wall that's kind of developed between the sales and trading side and the bankers, right? So you can't really ask someone to kind of connect you with a banker because they might not be able to in your side of the business, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges was to kind of get your foot in the door at any given bank. It could either be a bulge bracket, it could either be a middle market or a boutique. Really, I think that challenge kind of was similar all across the board. It didn't really come down to where you graduated from at that point or what your GPA was at that point. It really was, can you get your foot in the door and tell me why you add value starting day one?
Hmm. Got it. And so, like for you personally, from like a preparation standpoint, like what went into that? Like obviously, I'm sure there's some overlap, right? For example, when you got into sales and trading, uh, you also had an interview process, and probably a lot of the behavioral questions maybe are similar or the same. Although I'm sure you're answering them slightly differently or highlighting different qualities, because they look for slightly
Mhm.
different qualities. And then there's the technical interview, which I'm sure is probably a bit more different because you're looking for different things on the two sides, right? So can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So from the behavioral perspective, I think that, a lot of it was similar, the typical, tell me about yourself, tell me about one of your weaknesses, tell me about your strengths, anything about like how you solve problems from like a qualitative perspective, all the same. But, I think from the quantitative side, things really changed, right? From when I was interviewing for sales and trading, a lot of the quantitative technical questions were, tell me about the market, or, more statistical analyses type of questions. But now from a banking side, I think the interview questions changed drastically. It was more focused on, like the course you offer, right? It was more focused on really understanding like the three statement model, really understanding, how each line item flows through one another and being able to explain that in a setting where, you're not explaining it with numbers, but really explaining it with your words. I think that's one thing that really changed. And another thing that really changed was since they don't, they might also be looking at candidates who already have a banking experience but want to move shops, right? So you have to be able to be competitive at that point. So you have to really show them, look, like even though I wasn't making M&A models all night, or accretion dilution models all night, I still know how to do those. But these are some other skill sets that I've developed over the last 1.5 years that you shouldn't forget. Right, you have to be very honest at that point. And I think that's really what the differentiation was between my two interviews.
Right, right. That's gotta. I mean, I feel like you made it sound really easy, but that couldn't have been easy to do, right? Which is for someone who's been maybe building M&A models and DCF models day in, day out for the last year, versus for you, you didn't have to do that on the job. For you to convince them that, hey, even though I didn't have to do it on a job, I learned it on my own is and I'm just as good. Like, was that how did you convince them of that? I guess you're like, what did you? I'm sure that was like the elephant in the room, right? During a lot
Yeah.
of interviews, like how did you address that specifically?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is just through your technical knowledge, right? Like, I mean, they're going to ask you the questions. Like, if you think that you're coming from a sales and trading, or let's just put sales and trading aside for right now. Like, if you come from a research, an asset management, an operational, like any type of role, right, including sales and trading, you are going to get asked a DCF question. You are going to get asked, tell me about the three statements, or you're going to get asked situational questions where look, now you have that experience of understanding the market and understanding how companies react. Well, now tell me, if a company were to, have XYZ things happen to them, how does it affect the three statements, right? So
Right,
like making it more situational rather than just asking you quick off the book 400 guide questions to see if you know it or not, right? I think that's really what you had to show them and demonstrate to get things right. And then obviously, which I'm sure we're going to touch on throughout this interview right now, is how you prepare for that.
right. I guess that's since you brought up that's a natural segue. So why don't we just talk about it now? Like, so you decided to make this move. You knew you had to learn the technicals, which really is different from what you've been doing on a day to day from your sales and trading job.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and that's kind of primarily what you had us help you with, obviously. But um, you already had, I think, other resources, right? Like you already had the 400 questions guide, probably back from college, like your college days, right? Um, you already like, and even aside from the 400 questions guide, there's so many resources out there, right?
Yep.
So why did you decide to use Wall Street Mastermind to help you prep for the technicals versus maybe just using one of the more common resources, let's call it, that a lot of
Sure. Yeah.
people are using?
No, that's a good question. I think that the reason I chose, what why I'm even here today is because, just looking at the 400 question guide alone doesn't help you, right? Because you start memorizing the line items just one by one, and you're like, all right, question five is about this, question six is about this, question seven is about this, and then you don't really understand the idea or that topic, and the factor that really makes it, hit home, right? I think that you can memorize, what the differences are in line items for, depreciation, but, understanding why that is affected is very different, right? And you can't really learn that from just reading 600 pages of a 400 question guide, right? I mean, I'm sure there's people who've done it in the past, and I have a couple buddies that have done that, but it's just a lot harder. And I think that with the timeline and the competition, you don't want to risk it.
Mhm.
I think that some of the things that were really helpful to me within the program, in your program specifically, was the fact that you really broke it down into different segments and really, really emphasized on the fact that like you're really explaining each topic and making sure that you understand why something might be changing or why something might be the way it is, right? And I think that a lot of places, or a lot of material that you can find for free or online through your college days are just not like that. I don't think that I think some of the things that I'm just kind of remembering from top of my head that was helpful was when you really went through each single three, each of the statements and really broke it down line by line to explain, what this means before you even got into the numbers. That was something that really hit home and I still remember to this day. I think another one was your cheat sheet that you had built, right? That really took everything that you learned and put it on a piece of paper so you can kind of summarize it and understand, like, these are the things I need to know, right? And I don't think that a 400-page guide can do that for you, frankly speaking. And I think that anyone who thinks that they can, well, I challenge them to tell me that that's something that really was efficient for them from a time perspective,
Right.
just because these interviews only come once.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I'm definitely not saying that you can't do it with the guys because obviously there are people out there who do, right? I think there's also selection bias because we hear a lot of students tell us like, well, I see so many people that have done it just by using the 400 questions guide or using whatever other. I'm not trying to pick on the 400 questions guide, but it's a great
Sure.
guide. It's a great guide, but there's a lot of people say, oh, well, I've seen so many other people that have done it, so I should be able to do it too. But the problem is they're not looking at all the other people that try to do the exact same thing but failed, right? And if you look at the relative, if you look at the number of people in each group, relatively speaking, there's a lot more people that try to do it that way and fail than the people who actually were able to do it, right? So I think that's one. It's like it's a matter of probability, but also two, um, like you said, it's a matter of efficiency, right? Because anything is possible. If I gave you no time limit, you can take as long as you want. Uh, Anybody can learn anything eventually, right? Like if
Hmm.
you're smart enough. But uh, unfortunately, most of the time with investment banking recruiting, that's not how it works, right? Especially like if you're in college, there is a very like set timeline that you have to recruit by, right? Like if you're not ready, you don't know your stuff by the time recruiting starts, you've already missed the boat, right? If you don't
Right.
get your junior summer internship, it's really hard to get the full-time offer, right? Or even for you, like even though you were already out of college, but I know when we first talked, you were wanting to make that switch as quickly as possible, right? And then also you were already working 12, 13 hours a day and you're having to study after you get home from work. So you don't have a lot of time. You just want to be
Right.
efficient with it, right? And so for people that value their time and they want to not just do it faster, but do it better in less time, it's always going to be easier for someone who's a
Hmm.
subject matter expert to teach you something than for you to have to like self study or teach it to yourself when you don't really know it yet, right?
Right, of course. I think simply put, I think that a lot of those guides are very binary. They don't really have any, it's very black and white, right? And I think that when you actually have someone explaining you the concepts and really showing you visually, this is how you get things done, that adds a lot of color to it, right? And I think that when you're planning ahead and kind of studying and really figuring out your timeline for recruiting, you have to take that into account, right? You want to increase your probability of getting a job, and only one is, you just got to be lucky once, right? And I think that I think that you want to do what's best for yourself, right? Like I know a lot of people that have reached out to me now and have said, well, we don't want to really spend a lot of money on our recruiting. I think that maybe the guides online might be sufficient, right? But like I ask you, well, you spent so much money on your college to get that brand name on your college resume, but
Right.
now that extra $100 or that extra few $100s that you have to spend to kind of get that ball rolling to where you want to be, well, I think that it's a win-win at the end of the day. So, you really want to look at it from that perspective as well.
Right. It's an investment basically, just like
Right.
college is an investment essentially. Yeah, absolutely. Um, what about like financial modeling courses? Because did you take any financial modeling courses like Wall Street Prep or I don't know, there's a couple of those out there, the popular ones, right? Even Breaking Wall Street, I think they have one too. Like Did you use any of those for your technical prep?
Yeah, so I originally was using Wall Street Prep, and I don't want to say anything bad about the course, right? I think that it's a great course. It's very narrowed down to what you want to be doing, but I think that it's similar in the sense that it's like it felt like YouTube. You're just going through numerous videos where, the guy's quickly speeding through the whole model and kind of showing you how things get done. But then then if someone asks you, a secondary question, like the next level thinking of why that might be the case or why that might be the case, then then you really struggle with answering the questions.
Right.
I think building a model has another aspect that a lot of students forget is explaining the model, right? You can build a model day and night, but if you can't explain the model, then you kind of failed at your job,
Right.
right? So a lot of these interviews, I realized that you, especially for lateral recruiting or even recruiting right out of college, people have started asking you to build models for them as as one part of the interview.
Mm.
And I think that back when I was recruiting for some of these jobs 2-3 years ago, they didn't ask you those types of questions. But now I think it's becoming more common just because of the competition that's been out there, right? And I think that the way you had explained some of the material in your in your program, it didn't even require a YouTube video of the model being built, because you could just understand, what the line items would be of
Right.
an income statement or of a cash flow statement or of a balance sheet. So really, I think that's what it was really truly helpful.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to explain, which is our approach is different in that we are actually teaching you the underlying concepts behind the models, and we're teaching you how to explain the model, how to verbalize it,
Mhm.
because most of the time that's what you're required to do in an interview. In fact, like for sounds like maybe for you, because it was a lateral position and an experienced hire, you actually had to build some models during the interview process. They want to know that you can actually come in and hit the ground running and do the job, right?
Mhm.
For most of
Mhm.
our clients who are trying to go from college or even business school into a full-time role, they actually never get asked to build models in the interviews, but they what they do have to do is verbally explain the concept so that
Mhm.
they know you understand it, and then they can teach you all the Excel stuff
Yep.
during training before work starts. But I guess you won't have the luxury of training. You're just gonna hit the desk and just start working. It sounds like.
Yeah, I think that there's pros and cons to that aspect of it, but that's a whole nother conversation. I think that some of the models, sure, you're not going to be making the models during an interview, but sometimes when you make the models on Excel to prep for those interviews, really truly helps you understand how to visually explain it.
Yeah.
And I think you were really helpful with that. I remember a few months ago, I was asking you to send me a few models that, could be like potential quiz type of questions that you could get. And I think those were truly helpful. It doesn't, I think I want to really emphasize on the fact that when you pay for a course, that someone is willing to teach, you can always ask follow-up questions and ask for help, right? I asked you for a DCF model. I asked you for a three-statement model. I asked you for an LBO, right? I asked you for a lot of different things outside of what the course already offered me. And I think that being able to work together as a team to kind of get to where you want to be, it is much more efficient and increases your probability, at an exponential rate than you'd even imagine. So
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't want to give people the impression that we are against financial modeling. It's more so the order of operations, right? Like we don't like it when our clients do things out of order and they dive right into like, hey, let me try to become an
yep.
expert at building financial models when they can't even answer basic questions about how the three statements relate to each other. Because then that's like the analogy I was using is like that's learning how to run before you can even walk, right? We
Yeah,
want
I agree.
everyone to learn everything conceptually first, and then once you have the concept, internalized, then financial modeling is easy. That's just like translating what you already understand into Excel formulas, right? And
Yep.
that's not like rocket science. And but if you learn that, if you learn the concepts first and then you learn financial modeling, you're gonna have a much easier time
Hmm.
understanding what you're doing versus just watching some guy move around in a video on a spreadsheet and then you're just trying to keep up and you have no idea and it's going way over your head, right? That's what we see all the time, which is ineffective, right?
Of course. Right.
Um, Awesome. That's super helpful. So I guess last question for you, because I don't want to keep you for too long, but what's like one piece of advice that you wish someone would have given you, maybe back when you were first starting this process, or someone
Mhm.
that's in your shoes now? Like, what's something that you would want to tell them that you think would have saved you a lot of trouble, or made this process a lot smoother or easier for you? Like, what's something that you would tell people?
Yeah, I think that I want to break down the advice for people who are recruiting from college right now versus the advice I'd give for someone who's trying to make a lateral switch like I did. For people who are still in college trying to recruit right out of university, I think that one advice I'd give you is that when you're reaching out to people, really try to develop a relationship with them before you ask for the job, right? Like a lot of people will just tell you to be upfront because people are busy and don't want to dilly dally and, run around circles. But I promise you that you'll have a higher response rate to your cold emails if you just try getting to know the person before you say you want the job or before you say that you applied for the application, and that you're looking to potentially be an interview candidate, right? I think that oftentimes in first round calls, the cold calls, you just kind of right off the bat tell them that you applied for this position and you think it's really interesting and you kind of just start running towards that direction. But instead, you should just take it a step back and be honest, right? Like that this is something you want to do, and you're one of the people who was nice enough to reach out and reply back, and now we're on a call and I'd like to just ask you a few questions.
Right.
Just from that, I promise you that your next question when you ask them if they can help you is always going to be a yes. I think that increases your probability of kind of getting your foot in the door out of college. And then
Yeah.
from someone from a lateral perspective, I think that a lot of times people think that once they network with someone and apply is when they're going to get their first round interview. So they have that time period to prep for these interviews. But it's actually quite opposite. It's when you actually network with people and they want to hop on a call with you. I noticed that I think 3 out of the 5 calls that I did earlier on ended up becoming first round interviews. One of which I didn't even know. I originally was going in just trying to get to know the person. And 2 hours before the call, the guy emailed me and he said, "We're just going to make this a first round interview to speed things up." And then the second one, I found out just, I told him that I had applied and, yada, yada, yada. And he just said, let's just make this our first round interview.
Yeah.
So, I suggest, and frankly speaking, I wasn't ready for those because I thought that once I kind of talk to this guy and apply, I'll have that time period in between in the interim to kind of study for the interview,
Yeah.
and kind of get my facts straight. But you should always be ready when you're when you're reaching out to people as a lateral, to be ready to be interviewed, even on the call, just to get to know you.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. That's such good advice. That's pure gold right there for those of you who are listening. So I mean, the first point, I'll just make an analogy. It's like uh you go to the bar, you see a girl, you gotta talk to her first before you ask her out on a date, right? You don't just walk up to her and be like, yo, do you want to be my girlfriend? Like that's never gonna work, right? So you gotta like get to know the person first before you make an ask, right? Or otherwise, like they're just not going to be very, very receptive to that, right? And then that second point about how you got to actually be prepared to interview first before you network. It's the exact same thing that I always tell my clients. Is like, if you really think about it, what is networking? Networking is really just another form of interviewing. Like, you think you're just having this, chat, informational coffee chat with the person. Guess what the banker's doing? The banker's evaluating you, even if doesn't turn into a formal interview. They're evaluating you and they're assessing, hey, is
Mhm.
this someone that I actually want to, refer and put my name next to and vouch for? Because if you don't come across as someone that's qualified, and if you don't come across as someone that's likable, there's no reason for them to help you, right? So
Right.
it's just another form of interview. You're auditioning essentially for the opportunity to go through the real interview. And so I always say, like, you know what, like you got to prep your behaviors before you go into those networking conversations, because they're going to ask you about you, right? You're going to have a good story. You're going to have to explain why you want to go into banking and, all that good stuff. And then, like, sometimes uh, people will even ask you technical questions. Some bankers that are a bit more hardcore, they just want to, like, cut to the chase and know if you know your stuff. And if you don't, let's
Mhm.
not waste our time, right? And so, absolutely, I think it's a great point you made that, you got to you got to prepare before you go into these conversations so that you're not making a fool out of yourself, but also not wasting the other person's time, right?
Right, of course.
Um, that's awesome, man. So, look, guys, I think this has been super insightful. I mean, hopefully for you guys, but definitely for me as well. Especially me personally, I've never worked in sales and trading, right? And so it's good to get the perspective of someone that has worked there, and hopefully, this gives you guys a better idea about the differences between, you know, the investment banking side of the house and the sales and trading side of the house. For those of you that are, kind of considering between the two, just make sure you really do your research and know what it is that you want. Like Krish kind of alluded to, they have pretty different exit opportunities down the road, right? I would argue that um, the exit opportunities for investment banking is broader, right? Like there's more things that you can go into, whereas for sales and trading, it's a more specialized skill set, and there's probably a bit more narrow, right? And so you just want to really make sure that you're not just thinking about tomorrow, but you're thinking 2, 4, 5, 7 years down the line, right? But hopefully you guys found this to be insightful, and for those of you, like, if you're looking for help with the investment banking recruiting process, whether it's as a college or MBA student, or maybe you're more like Chris, where you're a recent grad and you're trying to make the switch into banking from a somewhat tangential field, but maybe not, exactly banking, feel free to reach out and we'll see if we can help you. Right? We may or may not be able to, depending on your background and situation, and we don't work with everyone. But if we can help you, we're obviously happy to help you. And so the first step to do that would be to just book a free strategy session with our team. You can do that by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. Just know that the street in the URL is abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we'll have someone on our team speak to you, learn more about your situation, figure out what your goals are and what challenges you're having, and we'll try to give you our best advice for what we think you should do. And whether you want to do that with us or on your own, that's totally up to you, right? So hopefully that helps you guys. Chris, I want to thank you again for just being so generous with your time and just coming on here and chatting with us about um, sales and trading and banking and all this good stuff. But also congratulate you again on your accomplishment and successfully making the transition from trading into banking. And I know you start your new job in 2 weeks, so best of luck with everything, and look forward to all the success that you have in the future. And definitely let's stay in touch, and don't be a stranger.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. Always love to help.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, that'll be it for today, and we'll be back soon with another one of these for you guys in the near future. All right, thanks for tuning in.